What's up guys, welcome to the course. I am Gorka Ranzavo, more known as Gorka Games, and I will be your instructor throughout the course. We'll learn how to make a very fun and complete Unreal Engine 5 project using blueprints. This is a beginner plus course, which means that if you already have some knowledge with Unreal and blueprints, this will be perfect for you. So we will not cover the absolute basics, but don't worry, I will be reminding you of many things. So I will turn you from being a beginner / intermediate developer into a full intermediate pro developer. We will cover a whole bunch of different mechanics, such as timer by events, behavior trees, blackboards, timelines, motion warping, additive animations, and much more. This course will supply you with all the necessary resources and assets that you will need. So let's take a look at the game that we will build. So we will be able to mantle over objects and just sneak around, avoiding all sensors. So we can go up to our AA guards and just take them down without being detected. We can interact with levers to disable other types of sensors. And just go and take down more guards that will be through our environment that we will be building with all of our animations and rain effects with Niagara and so on. You can see we'll have more guards and they will capture us and we'll have to retry. Additionally, we'll build things as the UI that we need to steal and escape, a main menu, pause menu, and much more. So I hope that you're excited to begin this course with me. Let's get started. What's up everyone? I hope that you're excited to begin this course with me. So, to get started, we will need to create a new Unreal Engine project. I will be using this Unreal Engine version, which is 5.2.1, and it is the latest as I'm recording this course. And I do strongly recommend that you use this same version as me. So, let's go ahead and click Launch to open it up. Alright, once it has opened up, we're gonna go into the Game section, and you can see that we have a bunch of templates that we can use. In this case, for this course, we are going to be selecting the third-person template. And honestly, we are only going to be using this template to get the characters and the basic animations, because we are actually going to be creating our player controller and blueprints from scratch. So really, the only reason we are using this one is to get the characters and animations. So make sure to select the third-person template. Let's choose blueprint. Let's select the target platform as desktop. And the quality preset, you can, depending on what hardware you have, I'm gonna be leaving it as default, which is maximum. But if you have a lower end hardware, maybe you're working on a laptop, maybe for you it's better to work on scalable. It will just lower a bit better the graphics from the start. For ray tracing, depends if your hardware supports it. In my case, not, so I'm gonna disable that. And then make sure that starter content is enabled, because it will just give us a few tools and models that we can use later on in the course, which will come in very handy. Then go ahead and select a project location, and let's put a project name, which in this case will be something as Stealth Course. You can put whatever you want. And let's go ahead and hit create. Alright, as you can see, the project has opened, so let's go ahead and touch a few things to make it more suitable for us and change a bit the layout. So the first thing I want to do is go into the window and then go into content browser and select this content browser 1. This will just go ahead and open this content browser, which I can just drag into the bottom part of the screen. And I just like to have it attached always here because it's a bit more handy. So we can here just select what assets we want and start dragging them into the viewport and into the level and so on. Then as you can see, we have the outliners, you may know. So we have a list of all the actors placed in our level. Then of course we have the details panel, where if we select an actor in the level, we have all its properties and we can go ahead and move it around and so on as we like. So another thing I am going to go ahead and let you know is that if for some reason, your hardware is not the best and you did not change your scalability, and when we create the project, you can just go into the settings over here, go into the engine scalability settings, and you can here change your graphics. So if you have a lower hardware, you can just go ahead and put in low, medium, high, whatever you want. And another thing that I was mentioning at the start, we are only going to be using the characters and animations. So what we are going to do is enter in this third person folder, and let's select this maps folder and basically just drag it into this content folder here. So select move. Basically, we are moving the map. Let's say okay. And you can see that if we just move the map, so we have it on here, on maps. And third person, you can see that we don't have anything. Great. And then the thing is that we have a blueprint and a game mode here. Basically, we are not going to be using them, so we can actually just delete them. So let's go select third person and press the delete. And then you say force delete. And as you can see, there is nothing in third person. Like if we enter, everything is empty. But basically, just go ahead and show in Explorer. Go into the content, and then you select again this third person folder and just press delete. So now it will be absolutely terminated, and we only have our third person map that we are going to be using. So now as you can see, we also don't have any game mode whatsoever because we did also delete it. So we will need to create a new game mode, and we will do that through the first lecture. So we'll set up our player controller and so on. Right now we just press play. We are with the default pawn over here. So that's it for this first lecture. See ya in the next one.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm here to show you where to ask questions and get support so you don't get stuck while taking this course. For all of these and everything else I talk about in this video, you'll find the links in the resources, either to the right or down below. If you can't find English captions where you're watching this, I've provided a YouTube link in resources explaining how to get them. First, we have the Game Dev TV Community Forum. This is a great place to ask questions and share your work. You'll get a ton of support from our teaching assistants and lots of encouragement from other students. When you're asking a question, please give as much information as possible and include any relevant code. This really helps the teaching assistants get you unstuck quicker. For more real-time chats, head over to our super active Discord server. You can ask specific questions in the relevant channels, or there's the lounge for more general game dev chat. We have thriving communities on Facebook with dedicated groups for Unity, Unreal, Blender, and 2D art. This is another great place to share your progress through the course and ask questions. And talking about sharing, if you do share your work on Twitter or Instagram, then please tag us. We love to see your creations. You can read about other game dev students and their journeys, as well as get hints and tips over on the blog. I hope that helps keep you unstuck. Now go enjoy the course. We can't wait to see what you create.
For all of the Game Dev TV courses, whenever an instructor makes a change to anything in the project, they commit that to the repo. What does that mean? Well, what I'm looking at here is the repository for the obstacle course section within the Complete Unity 3D course. This is a course that I've created. That's why I'm showing it to you as an example. This might not be the course you're going through at the moment, but I'm just using this as an example to show you. We host our repository either on GitLab or GitHub. They're both very similar. The interface is a little bit different. I'm showing you GitLab at the moment because that's what we're using nowadays, but some of our older projects might be using GitHub as the place that it's storing things. And so you've clicked on the link in the resources section that says this lecture's GitLab commit or this lecture's GitHub commit. So you found that in the resource against the lecture. You've clicked on it. It'll take you to something like this. It'll show you the name of the lecture. That should match up to the particular lecture you're watching at the moment. And you can see all the changes. So there's a lot of gobbledygook in here that you don't really need to know about. Particularly here in Unity, there's a lot of things that'll change within the scene that don't necessarily make sense. Usually what you're going to be interested in is what has changed within the code. So you can see here the .cs file within Unity, that's the script file, and I can see nice and clearly that the red line is something that's been removed, so we remove that line of code, and the green line is something which has been added. If you're interested in a file that's not within the ones that have changed, then you can click on Browse Files up in the top right, or Files over in the left-hand side of your menu. So you click on Files, that will show you here are all the files from the entire project as it finishes up. So this is the finished state once I've recorded all of the lectures, and this is the entire project. So if you want to go and grab the entire project as it looks at the end, check it out, play around with it, not a problem. Up in the top right, you'll see a download button. You can click on that and download as a zip file. Or if you already know a little bit about how repositories work and you've set yourself up with an application such as Source Tree, which I've got got just here. This is an example of source tree. You can click on clone and clone that. I'm not going to go through that exact process at the moment. If you want to know a whole bunch more about using Git, then check out Ben's Git Smart course. That's all about using Git and GitHub and source tree, and it's a great source to know more about using source control for your own projects. But for now, I'm just showing you how to get access to our projects that we're changing as we go through the lecture. And you can do that just by clicking on download. Now that will, like I said, download the end state of the project. I'm just going to hit back on my browser to take you back where we were. This is the incrementing a score. This is the link that I got against the lecture. If I click browse files over here now, I can see the files as they are at this point, up to this point in the project. It won't show me the end state. It won't have any spoilers. It's just up to where I am in this part of the project, which might be what you need. You can navigate through, say, to assets and find one of the other scripts, or if there's any other art files you're looking for, etc., you can find those within here. I might want to have a look in this file, click on that. When I click on it, it'll show me this entire file, all the information. I might say, oh, that looks really different to mine. I can just highlight all this and copy it and paste it into my project. So if you get really stuck, you can always go and grab our code that we're working on in the lecture, in the project that we've already recorded. You can always go and grab that code. Okay, back into the project. I've shown you how to access the current lecture. What if you're looking for a previous lecture or a future lecture? I can click over on here for history, but that will only show the history up to this point because it's within the context of my current commit. And you can see this commit SHA in here. This is the big old string of numbers and letters that says this is the particular commit that relates to this particular project in this particular course for this particular company. That's all cool, but I'm looking for all of the commits. So instead of clicking on history over there, I'm going to over on the left-hand side, click on commits. That will show me all of the commits up to this point once again. So if I navigate my way up to the top and find obstacle course for the project, that will take me all the way to the highest level. Now click up here where it says 17 commits up at the top. That will show me the history as well. So there's a few ways to get to things. If you're in GitHub, not GitLab, then be resourceful and have a look for the same names of things. You're looking for history, you're looking for commits, and you're looking for to be able to download or browse files if that's what you would like to do. Okay, that's all for this quick introduction of accessing our projects. I look forward to seeing you in an upcoming video.
In this first section, we will create the player blueprint, set up all of the input and movement so we can move around, animate the player with an animation blueprint and blend space, and that will be all set to move the player around our level. So let's get started. In this lecture, we'll be creating the player blueprint and game mode. So let's get started. Alright, let's begin by creating a new folder. So just right click in the content browser and go and create a new folder. And let's name this blueprint. So in here, we'll be placing all of our blueprints as we create them, which is key because everything has to be organized in the project. So let's enter in this folder and let's right click and create a new blueprint class. And here we'll have all of the logic of our player. As you can see, we have different classes that we can pick off. We're basically think of them as presets. So what we can do, as we're going to be building a player, is select the character class, which will already contain the character collision component, the movement component, and also a mesh that we can assign. So let's select it. Let's name this BP underscore as blueprint, and then let's name this robber. As in this course, we're going to be building our stealth environment, and it makes sense in this situation to name it robber. But if you just want to name it a generic player, go ahead. But I think it just suits a bit better, robber. So let's go ahead and open this blueprint up. And you can see that, let's place it here, we have different things over here. As you can see in here, we have the viewport where we can see our player in the 3D space. We have the components where we can see our mesh, capsule component, character movement component, and such things. We can also see our details panel with all the details of our selected component. Then we will also have this part of the blueprint where we can see all our functions, graphs, and variables. And then we can see the event graph, where all the logic with nodes will go. Great, so let's go back into the viewport and let's select a mesh and let's apply a character into this blueprint. So what we can do is go into the skeleton mesh asset part over here and select the mesh. As you can see, we already have a few characters because we created our third-person template, which is why we did this, to obtain all of these characters already. Now later on in the course, we'll replace it by a metahuman, but for now, we're gonna stick by a default character model so we can advance more in the mechanics. So let's select, for example, the SKM Manny Simple, which is just a generic character, okay? Now let's place this in position because right now it's the wrong rotation and placement. So in the location, let's put -89. So it's right in the base of the capsule component. And in the rotation for the Z-axis, let's put this as -90. And this is just so it's facing forward. As you can see now, it aligns with this arrow, which indicates the forward of our character blueprint. So that's great. Now we have our player here. For now, we are gonna not be animating this. We'll leave it for the next lectures. So let's hit compile, which is the process of converting the properties and graphs of this blueprint into a class. So later it can be actually executed. This is like normal code, like for example, C#. But let's set up now the basic logic for this character blueprint. Right now, it will not move or anything, so we have to do so. But first, let's create a game mode so we can actually spawn this character. So let's go back to the other window by clicking the third person map tab in the top left. And let's just create a new folder inside of blueprints and let's name this game mode. So everything is nice and organized. Let's open this, right click, and then once again, create a new blueprint class. And on here, we can see that we have another class, which is exactly what we want, and game mode base. Select this, and let's name this GM underscore as game mode. And let's put something as, I don't know, just stealth game mode, whatever you want to name it. Let's put it on caps, there we go. And now we can go ahead and open this up. And you can see that we have different things already assigned as the game state class, the player controller class, things like that, which are generic for Unreal, which will be already assigned, which is what we want. So don't worry about this right now. We'll cover them as we go. But basically, the only thing that we want to change right now is the default pawn class, which is the blueprint. In this case, we want to choose our BP robber that we have just created. So the default pawn class is the player that will spawn. So with that said, I can just compile, save, go back into my third person map and go into the world settings. Now you can see that we have this section with game mode. In here, we can now pick up our stealth game mode. And you can see that everything will be assigned, and we have the most important thing, which is our default pawn class set as robber. If I press play, you can see that we have our character being over there. So let's go back into the BP robber, select the capsule component, and let's add a camera. This is very important. So to add a camera, just click this add new component, and you can see that we have all this list of, well, things that we can add into our player. In this case, the first thing I want to do is add a spring arm. So let's select this, press enter, and as you can see, this will create like a line. So this will be the target where it will be anchored, and on here we'll be placing our camera. So just inside the spring arm, just select the spring arm, add a new component, and now we can search for our camera. In this case, it will be a normal camera. Press enter, and now you can see that it will be attached at the end of the spring arm. So we will be able to control the spring arm, and the camera will always be in place with a bit of distance, which will look very good. We can start to increase a bit the target arm length, like maybe 600 to make it a bit further away. We can play around with that length as we go. And then also a thing that we are going to do is make sure that use pawn control rotation is enabled, because this will enable us to control that spring arm, therefore rotate the camera and so on a bit later when we set up the input. And here is a very simple and quick challenge. Just find a good camera length that feels good for you. Just play around with the value, increase it, decrease it to something that you like, and that's it. So just pause the video, give it a go, and that's it. So now as you can see, if I press play, now we have our camera assigned. Great, so now that we have our player blueprints created, in the next lecture, we'll be setting up the player input and movement. So, see you in the next lecture. In this lecture, we will be setting up the player input and basic movement. So let's get started. Alright, so let's go into the content browser, right click and create a new folder. And let's call this input. Let's open this folder and right click, go into the input section, and let's create an input action. Let's call this IA underscore, and in this case, it's going to be the input for our movement. So let's call this something like move. So every time that you want to create a new input, we are going to be creating one of these. So for example, when we create one for crouching, we'll also create one of these. Or for example, for the stealth takedown, one of these. For interacting, one of these, and so on. Let's go ahead and enter. And as you can see, we have different properties for each input action. The description, if you want to put one. If it will consume input, trigger when the game is paused, reserve all mappings, and most importantly, the value type. Don't worry about triggers and modifiers for now. So right now, our value type is set as digital bool, and this is pretty much the standard. So this will just give the output of when the key is being pressed, and when it's being held, and also when it's released. So for example, if you were just to jump, you will use a digital bool, because it's true or false. But in this case, out of our movement, we're going to be using the axis to the vector 2D. And this is because this will give us two axes, the vertically and horizontally. So we can move forwards, backwards, left, and right. So this is the one that we want to use. Let's close this and save it. So now we have to create another asset in order to use our input actions. So let's right click, go into input, and create an input mapping context. Let's name this IMC, so input and mapping context, and let's saying this input player input. And let's open this up. So this is a collection of all the input actions that our player will be able to use. So when you create a new input action, we need to add it into this collection. So let's add here the new input action. In this case, it will be our IA move. And then on here, we need to assign the keys that we want to press at this input action. In this case, this will be WASD, as we want to move vertically and horizontally in all that directions. So there are two ways of assigning a key. We can search it manually, or an easier way is to press this button and then press the key in our keyboard. In this case, I'm going to do that, so just press W, and you can see it will be assigned. Let's do this with the other keys. So also for the A, S, and D. Right, so now we have all our keys assigned into this input action, but we have to modify some things. So let's open, for example, the W key, and the things that we need to add a modifier. The thing is that this will be by default moving in the horizontal axis, but we want to change this to move in the vertical axis, as W will mean that we need to move forward, and that is vertical. So in this case, we're going to add a modifier, which will be the swivel input axis values. And this is exactly what we want. As you can see, it will swap the X and Y axis. So in this case, for W, it will move vertically. Make sure this is set as YXZ, and great. Let's go ahead and close this, go into A. Now A by default will already move in the horizontal axis, so we don't have to add that swivel modifier. But what we need to do is add the negate modifier, because we want this to move into the left, and therefore we have to invert the movement. So this will basically invert the movement, so that's why we're adding that modifier into the A. Now for S, we have to go and add again the swivel input axis, because this is once again in the vertical, but this time it'll go backwards. So we will have to add also the negate modifier. So it'll go into the vertical axis and backwards. And then for D, it will be perfect because it will already be in the horizontal axis, and we will not need to negate it because it will already be positive. So that's great. We can just save and close it. So now it's time to add it into our player blueprint. So let's go and open our player blueprint, which is the BP rubber. And we're going to go into the event graph where we can start placing all of our logic. In this case, we can delete everything that was by default except for the begin play. So basically, that begin play will trigger when the game has started. So what we need to do is add that mapping context, which is the collection of all the input actions that we created, into this blueprint. So the player will be able to use all of that inputs. So let's go ahead and start doing that. So what we can do to add any node is just right click at any point on our graph. So just right click, and then the thing is that we can start searching for nodes. So in this case, we're gonna search the player controller. And you can see here we have it, get player controller. So in order to add those inputs, we have to do it from our player controller, because the player controller will control all of the player input. So once that we have our player controller, we're going to get the enhanced input local player subsystem. And basically, this is just accessing the component, in this case the subsystem, that is in charge of all the input in Unreal Engine. So from there, what we can do is just drag it. So you just get the output, drag it with the left mouse, stop holding it, and now we can also add a new node and it will automatically attach. And we can just search the add context, add mapping context node. And now what we can do is connect this node with this node by just holding and dragging. So when the game will start, we will basically get the player controller, get the local player subsystem input system, and then just add the mapping context. In this case, we want to choose the one that we created. So there we go. So now this blueprint will be able to call the inputs actions that we created. Great. So what we need to do now is go a bit down, right click at any point of our graph, and now call the IA_move action event that we created. In this case, it's going to be an action event, not the value, okay? Great. So basically, as you can see, this node will have different outputs when it's triggered, which is basically while the key is being held, when the key has started to be pressed. Don't worry about ongoing and cancel right now. And then completed is when we stop holding the key. In this case, we want to move while we are pressing the key. So in that case, we're going to use triggered. So in order to make our player be able to move, we can call this node, we just drag, add movement input. As you can see, this will contain 2 inputs. Well, 3, but in this case, we are only going to be using 2. As you can see, all the inputs in the nodes will always be in the left side, and outputs will always be in the right side of the node. So we will have 2 things that we have to control: the Y direction, which is the direction which the player will move, and also the scale value. Don't worry about the scale value, we'll call that in a second. But first of all, let's apply the Y direction. So first of all, let's make that our player will go and move left and right. So what we need to do is right click our graph and get the controller rotation. Control rotation. So we are getting the current rotation of our player. And the thing is, we want to get the right vector. If I know how to type. Alright, so now that we have our right vector, we can collect that into the world direction. So the thing is that because we added the negate modifier in one of the keys, this will turn to be -1. Therefore, it will always also have the capacity to move left. So depending on this scale value, it will move basically, it will be stationary, so it will be 0, or 1 to the right, or -1 into the left. So what we need to do is go into the action value, right click and split it. And now we have those both axes. In this case, we want to connect the X, as is the horizontally, into the scale value over here. And what we can do is double click in this connection and add a pin. And this will just make it a bit more organized and neat, which is very important when you create blueprints, to have everything in place and precise. Okay, so here comes the challenge for this lecture. So we made that our player can move basically left and right. Now let's make it vertically, so forwards and backwards. So this is a bit of a hint. You can use the get forward vector node and using the y-axis value that are input action outputs. With that said, pause the video, try it yourself, and we'll go through it together when you get back. Okay, so to do this, let's select the add movement input node, copy, so Ctrl C, and then Ctrl V to paste it. In this case, we are going to get the control rotation once again, but this time, instead of being the right vector, we will get the forward vector, because we want to move forwards and backwards. Let's plug that into the Y direction, and let's go ahead and get the value Y and plug it in into the scale value. Let's also double click in the connection to make a pin and mode here, and let's do the same over here so everything is nice and neat. So now if we compile and save and go back into our play mode, we can just press play and we can move left, right, forwards, and backwards. Great. So everything is going ahead and working. Now let's go ahead and add the mouse input so we can move our camera. So again, we need to go into our input folder and add a new input action. Right click, input, action, IA underscore, and just call this look. So in here we want to also put the value type to be axis 2D, vector 2D, as we will need our mouse to look up, down, left, and right. Pretty much as our movement, but with a mouse instead. Now we can close this and go and open our collection. As you may remember, we had to add that new action. In this case, it will be look. And now the thing is that in here we type mouse, you can see that we have one which is both of them connected, which is the X and Y. So we don't have to put in manually two. We can just go ahead and put this input, and it will automatically move horizontally and vertically. So now in our BP rubber, we can just go, and because we already have added that collection, we can now right click, IA underscore look, again the action events, and now we can go ahead and start moving our mouse. In this case on triggered, this while we are of course moving our mouse. So let's get triggered and say add controller, and now we have different options. In this case, yaw input, because that will mean left and right in the horizontal axis. And now we can do the same thing as we did with the movement. Just right click in the action value, split it. So now we have the two axes, and we'll plug the X. And now if we compile and we press play, we can move from left to right, as you can see. Now so the same with the vertical axis. So in this case, it will be add controller pitch. That will mean up and down. So now we can type our, plug in our value Y, and now we can compile and press play. As you can see, left and right, up and down. Now you may notice that the up and down is inverted. So what we can do is go into the action value Y, drag it over here, and now we can type this multiply node. Now there's another way of also typing multiply a bit faster, which is writing this asterisk key, and automatically will show up. I always use it, it's much faster. So now we can multiply this by -1 in order to invert the movement. So now we can plug that in, compile, and now the movement should be correct, as you can see. So now we can go ahead and move around and so on. But I just want to change one thing, which is basically where the character is looking. As you can see, if I move the mouse, it will automatically just rotate, and also I will always be facing where the camera is facing, which is not what I want. So to change this, what I'm going to do is go into the class defaults and search for yaw and to disable this. And if we compile and go back into the play mode, you will see that now when I rotate the camera, the player will not move and stay there, which is what we want. But now the character will not rotate again when it's moving in the direction which is moving. So what we need to do is go into the character movement component, and we will need to go down until we see this character movement rotation settings. And we want to enable this option, which is orient rotation to movement. So the character will face the direction which is moving. So now as you can see, when I go backwards, the character will face us, left, right, and forwards, and we'll have the whole character controller set up. So that's it with this lecture. We had set up the player input and basic movement. So in the next lecture, we'll be setting up the player animation. So see ya in the next lecture.